Hi, friends, and welcome back to our closing conversation on fairy stories by Tolkien. I am joined tonight by our good friends and legends and mentors from the legend fiction community. You'll see them as they come on screen. But we are finally, sadly, closing out the conversation on this manifesto that Tolkien wrote about 100 years ago. And if you're a Catholic fiction author, or maybe even Orthodox, then you absolutely need to know about this. And so we have been talking through the last, gosh, has it been 4 episodes? Or yeah, it's probably been 4 episodes, um, talking through this document in pieces, unable to like stop reading everything because it's all so good. But we've had to try to make some, very regrettable selections and just drop them out because we just can't literally read through everything. So today, what we're going to do is close it out. I'm going to talk through the epilogue and then maybe just sit back together and walk around any major overarching thoughts that we think are very helpful because they were helpful to us. We are members of the legend fiction writing community. If you've never heard of us, there's a link in the description. You can check out our community. But we are Catholic fiction nerds and authors. And so understanding what Tolkien has had to say about fantasy fiction and creativity, especially subcreation, is pretty important for us as authors. He's our guy. Maybe our patron saint one day. We'll see. Okay, so we're going to get into the epilogue, and then what I'll do is I'll read a selection, and then each of us will then share a little bit about what we think, if anything, or you can just say pass, and you can pass. So it's a relatively short selection here in the epilogue. So here's what he has to say. This joy, which I have selected as the mark of the true fairy story or romance, or as the seal upon it, merits more consideration. So if you don't remember from the last conversation, he talks about his special word that he coined, eucatastrophe, which is the joyous turn, which is the when everything is absolutely lost, something unexpected, maybe magical, happens that turns everything around. And he holds that this is an indication of a true fairy tale when a fairy tale is trying to be a true kind of mapping of the ultimate reality of the creation story that we live in. And so there needs to be specific story points if it's going to be this eucatastrophic story. If it doesn't have it, well, it's not a fairy tale as far as he's concerned. You can argue and we can all argue, but that's his point of view. All right, I'll continue. Probably every writer making a secondary world, a fantasy, every sub-creator wishes in some measure to be a real maker, or hopes that he's drawing on reality, hopes that the peculiar quality of this secondary world, if not all the details, are derived from reality or are flowing into it. If he indeed achieves a quality that can be fairly described by the dictionary definition, inner consistency of reality, it's difficult to conceive how this can be, if the work does not in some way partake of reality. So the peculiar quality of the joy in successful fantasy can thus be explained as a sudden glimpse of the underlying reality or truth. It is not only a consolation for the sorrow of this world, but a satisfaction and an answer to that question, is it true? The answer to this question that I gave at first was, quite rightly, if you've built your little world well, yes, it is true in that world. And that's enough for the artist, or the artist part of the artist. But in the eucatastrophe, we see in a brief vision that the answer may be greater. It may be a far off gleam or echo of evangelium in the real world. The use of this word gives a hint of my epilogue. It is a serious and dangerous matter. It is presumptuous of me to touch upon such a theme, but if by grace what I say has in any respect any validity, it is of course only one facet of a truth incalculably rich, finite only because the capacity of man for whom this was done is finite. All right, I'll read one more paragraph and then we'll walk around it. I would venture to say that approaching the Christian story from this direction, it has long been my feeling, a joyous feeling, that God redeemed the corrupt, making creatures, men, in a way fitting to this aspect as to others of their strange nature. The Gospels contain a fairy story, or a story of a larger kind which embraces all the essence of fairy stories. They contain many marvels, peculiarly artistic, beautiful, and moving, mythical in their perfect self contained significance. And among the marvels is the greatest and most complete conceivable eucatastrophe. But this story has entered history and the primary world. The desire and aspiration of subcreation has been raised to the fulfillment of creation. The birth of Christ is the eucatastrophe of man's history. The resurrection is the eucatastrophe of the story of the incarnation. The story begins and ends in joy. It has preeminently the inner consistency of reality. There is no tale ever told that men would rather find was true, and none which so many skeptical men have accepted as true on its own merits. For the art of it has the supremely convincing tone of primary art, that is, of creation. To reject it leads either to sadness or to wrath. Okay, we'll pause there for a minute. Mary, I saw a lot of emphatic nodding. What's going through your mind?
There's so much good stuff in this. But I guess two things that I would really point out is the way he talks about joy, and he says that when you have like that happy ending at the end of a fairy tale that comes unexpectedly, and you don't know you don't necessarily know it's coming, and it kind of surprises you. He says it's not just true in that world, but it's also is true in our world too, and that's part of why it's so powerful. And then, of course, I just love how he ties it into Christianity and the gospel story, and says that the birth of Jesus is the catastrophe of man's history, and that the resurrection is the catastrophe of the incarnation. Um, it's just such a wonderful way to end this too. It's just so happy and so like um, he's brought us through all these different analyses of fairy tales, what is and what isn't, and then he ends on he has this. Yep, just has to end on on a nice high note here at the end. It's so beautiful.
There you go. Silver shores and a swift sunrise. Gabby, how about you?
Yeah, I was thinking about how he was talking about truth, and yes, it is true, and it's true in this world, that I made. And it even is in its own way true outside of this world that I made, because I think when people talk about reality or truth, there's specifically in reference to fiction at least, there's this emphasis on the the way that it comes out physically. So, like, people who walk around and don't fly and can't make things float or whatever, that is true, that is real. And I'm like, but that's just the accident. That's just kind of the way that God, where we live, happened to decide that things were going to work. He could have and does decide so many other things. He could have chosen to make all of us with wings, and he just chose not to, but that wouldn't make us any less us. That wouldn't make reality any less real. And God became man. A virgin conceived and God became man. That is not how stuff works, but it's still true. So I just really loved thinking about how Tolkien was saying, don't get so hung up on the it's like splitting hairs. Don't split the hairs when you're missing the point. The point of this story is the fairy tale, the life, the eucatastrophe, where everything, grace and humanity and growth, they all come together and they make this great thing. That's the point, and that's why it's true. And because the accidents are so much more flexible, God can make a person conceived normally who is not the son of God, and then he can make God made incarnate, who was conceived miraculously. He can do that in either way, and that's not the point. The point is what God is doing. And because he's provided that flexibility, then we get to enjoy that flexibility with our stories. It's like, yeah, I get to make horses with wings, and I get to do, people who can control the shadows. Does that happen here now? Well, no. But that's not the point. And the point is true, and it's the core, the beauty that is true. And that's really exciting.
Yeah, that's great. Caitlin, what are you thinking?
Oh, these are great reflections. Yeah, I was just enjoying uh, you know, an author, creator, sub-creator talking about creating and, subcreation and everything. Like it's like, yeah, we want to create these worlds and these stories and we're basing them on some sort of truth and I don't know, it was just I was smiling the whole time you were reading it. The joy that Mary talked about, the truth that Gavi talked about, um, all of that was running around in my head and just kind of like, yeah, that's it. Um, so I guess I don't have anything profound to add. Just
No, it's just great to celebrate it
yeah.
all. And I love his line. He talks about the Gospels containing a fairy story.
Hmm.
Not that they are, but that they contain, this thing that a fairy story is.
Yeah. I mean,
Emerges through the
if you
Gospels.
think about the gospel story and the way the spiritual world, what we know about it, and God's love for us, and how He redeemed us through Jesus and everything, it does start to sound like we're living a fantasy story. So I
Mhm.
really love
Yeah.
that. I love that too. It's like more real
It
than
does give it
life
does
and
give us
realness.
hope. There you go. Exactly. More real than what we think is real.
Yeah.
And especially when we live in a world where which is kind of where we live now, where the culture has normalized, how do you say this nicely, I guess, everything that it has, right? It's normalized, I don't know, concrete superstructures and living far away from nature and completely being out of touch with everything spiritual. And like, this is normal life. This is reality. And I mean, he was fighting this from page one in this. Everybody in his time saying, oh, the factory down the street, this is reality. It's in your face. You can touch it. You can kick it. It spits coal and tar at you. I would rather have this, down my street because it's real. And Tolkien's like, how the heck is that more real than everything in Narnia? And of course, we're talking at a level now of imaginative apprehension of reality that a very, very narrow mind can no longer accept. And so he's like, well, when you go and you write stories for that very narrow minded thing, you have to fracture into it like dandelions breaking through concrete. A bigger, wider, wilder reality has to, break in. Otherwise, if we just simply tell little stories, which is what happens with a lot of Kindle trending, right? If we just tell stories inside your frame of mind and sort of leave you there, well, what good are we actually doing to help you re-engage with actual reality? That's why I love his line. He says, in the eucatastrophe, we see in a brief vision that the answer to all of our pain and hunger and sorrow and striving, the answer may be greater. It may be a far off gleam or echo of evangelium in the real world. Um, I didn't finish watching it, but there was a movie called The Northman that I was watching last week, and they tried to do a grim, dark adventure, semi-horror thriller story set in the North, Viking kind of thing. It was kind of cool. It's kind of well done. Maybe I'll finish it. I don't know, but the sense of this grim, dark kind of cosmos, and how for a lot of us modern people, that is the background default answer to or state for how reality is, right? Um, and so all the rest of us Christians and all with our lovely, nice, fairy tale stories, like, well, we all just like deep down, we all know it's not real. Like seriously, we all know. And Tolkien comes in and he goes like, no, you're living in a fogged out nightmare of a reality. And so to create stories that have these turns where the good thing that's outside of your blinkers can break in and remind you that elves. I'll just stop there. Okay,
Yes.
let's continue.
That should be
So
the title of this video. Just elves.
there we go. Okay, that's a good one. We'll do that. I would venture to say that approaching the Christian story from this direction, it has long been my feeling, a joyous feeling. Oh no, I read this already. Let's keep going. So it's not difficult to imagine the peculiar excitement and joy that one would feel if any specially beautiful fairy story were found to be primarily true. Its narrative to be history, without thereby necessarily losing the mythical or allegorical significance that it had possessed. It's not difficult, for one is not called upon to try and conceive anything of a quality unknown. The joy would have exactly the same quality, if not the same degree, as the joy which the turn in a fairy story gives. Such joy has the very taste of primary truth. Otherwise, its name would not be joy. It looks forward or backward. The direction in this regard is unimportant. To the great eucatastrophe. The Christian joy, the gloria, is of the same kind, but it is preeminently, infinitely, if our capacity were not finite, it is preeminently high and joyous. He loves his side tangents. But this story is supreme and it is true. Art has been verified. God is the Lord of angels and of men and of elves. Legend and history have met and fused. But in God's kingdom, the presence of the greatest does not depress the small. Redeemed man is still man. Story, fantasy still go on and should go on. The Evangelium has not abrogated legends, it has hallowed them, especially the happy ending. The Christian still has to work, in mind as well as body, to suffer, hope, and die, but he may now perceive that all his bents and faculties have a purpose which can be redeemed. So great is the bounty with which he has been treated that he may now, perhaps, fairly dare to guess that in fantasy he may actually assist in the affoliation and multiple enrichment of creation. All tales may come true, and yet, at the last, redeemed, they may be as like and as unlike the forms that we give them, as man, finally redeemed, will be like and unlike the fallen that we know. That was dense. I'm going to ask somebody else to speak. Gabby, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I was actually latching on to the happy ending bit, the eucatastrophe, about how the fairy tale isn't complete without that.
Mhm.
And I thought so many thoughts, which is, first of all, it really ties into that idea of a fairy tale being kind of a microcosm of our entire lives. Because, at the moment being, doesn't always feel like a happy ending, so you have to look full. And then I was also thinking about how he was saying, if people were to say the only true thing was if it happened in history, and I'm like, well, there goes our happy ending. There goes the eucatastrophe, because we haven't gotten there yet. The arc of history has not gotten there yet, and so it's this really hopeful, exciting, looking forward to God, just the victory of good. That's why. So I love horror books. I love horror stuff, but not the ones where then it just feels like icky at the end. It's just like, and the devil came back and we all died. Yay. No, I like the horror ones where you see the end and just even by the skin of their teeth, the good wins, you know? And I think that's really what we're all looking for, what we're all starving for. It is that Christian hope, and we get it every time we have a fairy tale type book. And then I was thinking about how, sometimes we get to the point, I know I get to the point where, and I don't know if it was Tolkien himself or what, but our culture has gotten so used to the idea of just a happy ending that at some point we're like, well, now I'm not even scared for the character. I was thinking about the Hunger Games, because I'm reading the new one, which is phenomenal, by the way, but it's not exactly a happy ending thing, because that by the end it's a prequel, so that by the end our main character does not get away at all. And so I was thinking about how that was impacting me possibly more than the first Hunger Games, because the first Hunger Games I was like, well, of course Katniss is going to win. Of course Katniss is going to spark the revolution. And so I was thinking, okay, so what's different? What has changed between that happy ending that Tolkien was talking about, that eucatastrophe, to now where it's just like, main character invulnerability? And I think one is just people working their way into a formula, and it's losing that subcreation bit. Now it's just factory. Now it's just a factory of that original creation. But also, I think it can. I don't know. I would have to think about it more. But just the thing that I keep zeroing in on in my head is just the fact that it is a microcosm of our lives. Is that, of course, there is that hope at the end. There's God at the end of the tunnel. But in the meantime, there's so much more. There's moments of depression, there's moments of just like sky high joy, there's struggle, there's absolute failures in this instance where you don't come back from this specific instance. And then you keep going in another direction. And I think that is kind of what I love so much about stories that really do reflect reality, is they're reflecting reality in the diversity of the experiences of our lives, not just like, hey, this girl has a super skill and she sparks the revolution and she wins. Not that. And I love the Hunger Games, so I'm joking a little bit when I say that, but then everything after that kind of fell into the formula of that, and then it stopped being a reflection of reality because it's just being a formula, and that is not life. So that was a really long, extended brainstorm thought essay-ish way of saying I really latched on to this idea of these fairy stories being a reflection of our lives with hope at the end, and how we really thrive in getting a piece of that in every story.
So you've touched on some really cool points that we'll try to come back to as we will keep walking around with. But just a little thought. I'm really interested in a point that you brought up, which was we have a problem with lazy storytelling because we know main characters are walled off with plot armor from anything happening to them. So there's a metaphor, like what you said, of the light at the end of the tunnel. It seems to me that how do you avoid lazy storytelling? Well, and you'll see this with the best stories, the character is convinced the light at the end of the tunnel is a train coming in the opposite direction. And so it's not the solution, it's the thing you want to avoid. And so you now spend the whole story putting them through hell on earth so that they can begin to change their perception of this good thing. But how many of us end up running in the wrong direction and end up in cautionary tales because what we thought we saw was not actually true? And so that's a way, at least off the cuff, seems obvious to me. That's one way to try to earn that happy ending. Okay, before we get into all of that, Mary, what was going through your mind with that last section, which was the closing 2 paragraphs, actually, of the entire document? So any thoughts come to your mind?
So I would say I have some things to say about what Gabby said that I want to say too.
Just talk about anything you want. Go ahead.
That's really good. So Gabby was asking about like how to make the happy ending kind of feel real again, not just like manufactured. And I think it comes back to that same thing he talked about, it having had that element of unexpected grace. It has to be part of the story. And I have a couple moments in my newest book that are going to have a moment like that, hopefully. No, they do. And it's like, first of all, you can't just be the characters pushing through, like you were talking about yesterday about punching a little harder. I'm sorry, last week, punching a little bit harder. It has to be like something coming from outside into the person that is helping them and saving them. Like, I guess, yeah, that's something divine kind of coming in. But then, Dominic, you were talking about how, like, yeah, there's also the aspect where the main character would be like running away from something that they're afraid of. But if they can turn back and face it, that can lead them to an unexpected kind of happy ending, like a resolution of the problem. So a lot of times in life, like the things that we find are so difficult and scare us the most can also teach us the most and help us to get to that place where we really discover who we are and what we're made of and how much God loves us. So yeah, and if you can capture something of that inside of a book or a story, well then it's good. Yeah, that's what we want to be doing as writers.
You're muted.
Caitlin, anything come to your mind?
This is also great. I liked how Tolkien was kind of noting, I think, something that we were getting to because he was building towards it, about how I think he was saying even if the facts in the fairy story that aren't real were real, if it's the same story, the joy is still there. It's like the joy was the most important part. So that, and I think what he's talking about is the earned happy ending. Um, so yeah, I think it is important for us to try as writers to earn those happy endings, whether it's through the right, character development and plot, so it's like really true to the character, what they're choosing, where they're going. And I love that analogy about the tunnel, Dominic. I hadn't heard that before, but that sums it up very well, because they don't understand, the character doesn't understand what they really need to do to win at the end, and they're doing the wrong things until they have the aha moment. So I think that was great. Um, and then, yeah, it's really beautiful how Tolkien then turns it back into reflecting on the Christian life as well, and how we need to have that hope for our own happy ending, and how, the middle part is not all happy ending, but that we're still hoping for that. And yeah, um, I think that is one of the reasons why stories are important, is it reminds us that happy endings are possible and true in the long term. And yeah, I think I had another thought, but it's escaping me. Yeah, I don't know.
It's no problem. Thanks. So I want to come back to this happy ending thing because, oh my gosh, my brain's going in too many ways. Too many people talking upstairs. So if you're, what am I trying to say? If you're trying to craft a fairy tale, something that if you are trying to craft a fairy tale, there are specific notes and points that you want to hit in a story. We talked last week, like you brought up, Mary, how if you tell a story where all the character has to do is punch a little harder and then they win, and there are a lot of stories like that, then that doesn't count as a fairy tale. It might have 90% of all the other elements, but it is not a true mapping of the entire human experience, right? Now, I want to walk around this with everybody, the idea of the deus ex machina kind of thing, which is how the gods come in the ancient Greek plays and they just solve everybody's problems from the outside magically, because they end up getting in absolutely impossible situations. We don't like that very much in modern stories. We largely because I think of the advent of Christ, the idea that a hero is somebody who goes all the way to and then through the end, and there is a part of their own steam in stepping up to the plate to collaborate with the great task. And in the old world, they didn't really have that, or they didn't know what to do with that. Because in the old world, you didn't have the resurrection. And so he has this line, right, where he says, the Evangelium, so the gospel stories, the gospel great mythology, has not abrogated legends, it has hallowed them. It's sanctified them, it's allowed us to find the truth that was buried inside them that we weren't even totally sure we were intuiting, but we're trying to make sense of it. And then it has hallowed them, especially the happy ending. So where am I going with that? There's, before the resurrection, when you died, you went to your fathers. You went to some kind of a limbo-like state. You got through your purification, and then you sort of went to the pale lands, right? That's what the Romans believed, if I remember right. And you were with the nominally good, but you didn't ascend to be with the gods because, well, you weren't a god. Maybe the demigods cut it in Olympus. And if you weren't awful, then what are the Elysium? I think the Elysian Fields. That's what they call it. It's basically where you went. don't exactly remember what the Hebrews
Elysium was
thought.
the reward. The
Right.
asphodel was the fields.
Thank you. So there's like Hades, which you didn't want to go to. Elysium was the best you could get, or the asphodel fields, and then Olympus is where that's where they lived, but we don't go there, so we can only hope for like good stuff. But you get this weird moment, like Odysseus trying to get back home, and then he's wanting to meet with somebody I think who was good, right, and get advice from a prophet who's in the underworld, and so he bleeds 2 goats, and he allows the shades to come and nourish themselves on this sacrificial, uh, blood, and then they gain a little bit of strength, and he can speak with Tiresias, I think it was. So that's the vision of the afterworld. There's no actual happy ending. Closest you get maybe is Ragnarok from the Vikings, but even that's almost post-Christian. So with Christ, you get the eruption or the invasion into our mind and myth making, that there's something more than just the edge of the sky that we can't get beyond, we can't see beyond. There's something good and wonderful. So, and then here's my sort of last thoughts. Like when we talk about happy endings, I used to have a hard time with them as a little kid, little teenager, because Cinderella would get in the carriage and then she would drive off down the road with the prince, just married, and they would kiss in the window. And then I would think, yeah, but there's going to be tomorrow morning. And then she's going to wake up and stub her toe. And then it all starts all over again. So, now at that point, that's the cynical side that's missing the intention of this narrative moment that is being created, which is trying to map the entire human experience and then do it in an infinity of little ways, to try to connect with you over and over again, to sort of remind you that all will be well and all manner of things will be well in the end. And if it's not all well, it's not the end. So this is where I want to kind of punt it back to everybody. What seems obvious to me is if you're telling a story where the character just has to punch 3 times harder and there is nothing like special or else, there are some kinds of stories where that is needed. And that's an important kind of story to tell. But I think it is nested within the timeline of your, let's say, total life timeline. And a fairy tale is trying to map to the total life timeline, total experience of what you can look forward to, even if you do feel you live in a grimdark universe where there's no hope and stuff. It's at those moments when you need fairy tales more. I think today is one of those kinds of times where when you have a lot of media and modern culture has a lot of our minds in lockstep, you need this reemergence of fairy tales, and I think we're seeing it. I want to keep talking a lot, but I'm not sure I should. Anybody have something they want to like poke a hole in or walk around anything that I've shared there?
I did, yes. So, you brought this up before. When you're talking about how there's like something good beyond what we can see, which is basically what he says right at the end of fairy stories. I was thinking about this scene, and I think it's one of people's favorite scenes in Lord of the Rings, because if you look it up online, like lots of people like it and stuff. It's when Sam is looking up and he's in Mordor with Frodo trying to get to Mount Doom, and he looks up and he sees some stars. The clouds part just a little bit and he can see the stars.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says, it reminded him that this shadow is but a passing thing. And I think that's basically what he's trying to say in this part. And what you're trying to say too, Dominic, is that there's all these different struggles, and maybe the modern world we live in is kind of this foggy gray place, but there's something else, there's something more beyond what we are seeing, and that's what we're hoping for, and that's what we're reaching for. That's that glimpse of redemption.
Well said. Beautiful. Gabby, what do you think? If you wish.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with you guys. The only additional thought that I had was, thinking about the happy ending, the hope, that this is but a shadow that will pass, And I was thinking about, well, I was having 60 different thoughts at the same time. But I was thinking about how sometimes, like I was mentioning before, if you have that kind of formulaic thing, my mind went straight to romance, is that sometimes if it is not in the format of a fairy tale, like a genuine fairy tale that reflects life and feels, and it doesn't have like, you know, it doesn't have the deus ex machina, but it also doesn't have that punch 3 times harder thing. So if it is an actual fairy tale, then it really does. It really does alleviate that kind of existential weight that you can feel just about all these things that we're inundated with about the darkness of the world. And then it kind of makes me sad because I feel like a lot of the things that, even though we're hoping for it, we're wanting those kind of fairy tales. I feel like a lot, not all of it, but a lot of the stuff published recently, it's a little bit more like a pill, like, oh, the world is so dark, I rather would not think about that. And so you just kind of like numb yourself and you're like, romance, whatever. That's not just romance. I just have a vendetta. But I'm really, really excited to see what this world could do with like genuine fairy tales where it's not just, oh, I don't want to think about it. You know, I don't. And of course, that is part of it. Like, it's part of the joy to be like, hey, I'm not having to dwell on whatever this next social media tragedy said, but to have that more satisfying thing, not just, hey, this is numbing me up for a while so that I don't have to think about anything. It's a genuine, wow, I'm not thinking about the terror of this world right now because I am reminded that there is good amidst the evil, so it doesn't feel like it doesn't apply at all. There is good. And just, I know the feeling of needing that.
That's great. Well said. Caitlin, what do you think?
I love how you put that, Gabi. So I think, Dominic, one of the things you said was pointing out about how modern these days, like readers, us, we don't really appreciate something that seems like a deus ex machina, where the hero is saved at the end by someone other than himself. And I think that commonly myself and probably others think about the reason why that is being like, well, we want to see the hero do it themselves. We think, and maybe because we think we have to do it all ourselves. But then you
Good
said
point.
that it's because the model for us is Jesus, who went through death and conquered death, and then went to the resurrection. And I think that's a different view on why we don't like Deus Ex Machina than I was thinking of before. Because Jesus is our model hero. Instead of thinking of like, the Deus Ex Machina would be that God the Father got Jesus down off the cross, I guess,
Right.
but that's
Or
not.
like Moses in the Red Sea.
Yeah. Yeah, that was all external power, right? But now, with Jesus as our model hero, we want to see somebody go through the deepest, darkest and things and struggle and really wrestle with it, and then still have a resurrection moment and still win the day in some way. And that's what we're longing for. And it's because, I guess, because we're longing for Jesus. And that's a really cool perspective, I think.
I like how you said that. That's really true. I think it's really true.
That's beautiful.
There's
My tender heart.
think that to try to build on that a little. Okay. So we talked a little bit about plot armor, right? Because it's hard to tell a story about a person. Okay, where are the parameters on this? It's hard to tell a story about someone when they die because none of us have, biographical experience of what happens afterwards and how that all works. And so we're not gifted that level of clarity and stuff. So we've got to put plot armor on these people. But the experience of a Golgotha or a Calvary thing is an essential part of the hero's journey. Like they have to go through a dying process. Something must die. Now, it's obviously really nice if something else can die and like not you, and you stay through, which is the ultimate reality that we all come to sort of try to make sense of, right? As Christian initiates, as being Christian. Well, within your story, the character has to go through some kind of a death. And let's take Frodo as an example. By the time he gets to the end, right, he comes back to the Shire and he's like, I can never be the Hobbit sitting under a tree the way I was. That Hobbit died. I don't know exactly the point at which he died. It was a process that took 9 hours of movies. But I am now, that Hobbit has died. I am now different. And I'm thinking of maybe any number of almost, especially action thriller movies and stuff. It's always, I think if you sort of pick apart the myth that's underlying a lot of these stories, there's a moment that might be right at the beginning where the character goes, I've lost my beloved, or danger is being visited upon things I care about. Whoever I was yesterday is now dead. I am now this person, and I'm going to John Wick my way through this whole thing. Or it's like I'm going to resist the call to adventure for about 50% of the movie, and then that part will finally die, and then I will become the resurrected me who endures all the way to the end and, well, visits justice upon the evil didders and whatever. So a little bit of a side quest, but a point, I think I want to come back to something Gabby was saying earlier, which was the idea of partly earning the ending and sort of the train light at the end of the tunnel and stuff. And I've been chewing on a thought for the last couple of years about the point of why we tell stories at all. Okay, so this sort of builds on the idea of plot armor and why characters must live and why we put them through all the hell we put them through, right? So I was trying to understand, like, if we're trying to be devout, religious, developing, people growing in our spiritual lives, there's a point at which, we've heard these arguments from people going, well, why are, they're just lies breathed through silver, right? You're effectively lying dramatically with glitter, right? And making money off of it. And, I used to really struggle with that a lot. And so then I had a thought a couple of years ago. I'm curious what you ladies think. And of course, everybody in the comments, you are welcome to, chew on stuff too. So it's the idea that if you were to imagine a line from like nothingness to God, and a human or a person, any person technically, is somewhere on that line. If we're honest, we're probably closer to sort of the nothingness and sort of further away from God, because it's the adventure of the whole thing is to get towards God. Now, it's not a tension between good and evil, because evil is not a thing. Evil might be, you could argue, like when you get off the line or something. But you're progressing towards more and more Godfulness, right? And in our tradition, we call that divinization or theosis. You are becoming like God. God is filling you with himself and his life, which is inseparable from him and his person. So you are becoming more like him. And we will leave that to the rest of the Sunday school teachers. Now, where do stories fit on this, right? Because we don't actually tell stories about the Virgin Mary in the sense of like her inner life. Or if we do, it's like hard to do and we have to be very careful with it and stuff. Well, why is that? Well, it's because she was somebody who perfectly said yes. And so she's the dream of the spiritual life. She's the dream of a perfect human, perfect person, same like Christ. Now, he struggled a ton. We're not gifted to see all of her internal struggles with the clarity that we're given of him and of Christ's struggles. But he said yes at every point to what was being requested of him. I think that we tell stories about everybody who says no.
Yes.
And that's called a story. If the person said yes from day one, that would be like, what's the word? Well, it would be like a mystical reflection. And most of us don't read that. Most of us read stories. Why? Because we resonate with the fact that somebody was given a limb to get out of the pain that they're in, but they're like, why are you trying to hit me with that thing? I reject you and all that you stand for. And it's probably a train because everything wants to kill me because life is hard and I can only count on me. Maybe I can't even count on that. And so the thing that then, of course, has to like die is the direction you're looking at on the line. And if you're looking down towards nothingness, and like, I'm trying to get away from that, and you're not looking, of course, towards where it's all going, the mystic is the one who like, oh, I should look that way and run in that direction as fast as I can.
It's like mystic starts where a story ends.
Doesn't that just sound, that just sounds true to me. What do you think? What's going through your minds? Mary, what do you think?
Thomas Aquinas, after he wrote all the Summa Theologiae, what did he say? He had like this mystical experience and he said, all my words are just straw. And he never wrote anything again.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's how it
I've
goes.
heard that,
I
yeah.
might be paraphrasing it a bit. Sorry, anyone. But yeah, like he wrote all this inspiring stuff and then he's like, it's all garbage. Compared
He wanted to burn it, but I think everybody else pressed him not to. Yeah, exactly.
Is that what you mean?
Well, maybe. I think so. Because, like, don't we all get this weird, like, the same sense when you get into a story and it's too easy for the character and they're just like, we call them Mary Sues for a reason because everything goes perfectly and they just waltz into their happy ending. Or life gets really hard and then the ending is gifted to them. They're like, what did I just read? This isn't reality.
Yeah, I think you're right that we tell stories about the people, the characters who say no to what they're supposed to do and then struggle through it and get, punished by life and circumstances and villains because of that, because they're not doing it the right way until they finally learn how to do it the right way and then they triumph because of that learning. And I think we want that because it's a reflection of reality and our life. Like, what we were talking about with Tolkien and how he's saying that we're looking for the truth in our stories. And I think that it's partially also because we're kind of subconsciously using stories to practice life. So we get to practice, being in the situation that the character is in and try on in our imagination the choices the character is making. And then that informs
I
our
like
future
that. Keep going. Same way.
choices. This is a concept from Wired for Story, I think, by Lisa Cron. And it just really resonated with me. So it stuck with me that I think it was research that she did about why humans tell stories, basically. And it's practice for real life. It's learning how to deal with situations we haven't been into yet that we might be into. And with fantasy and sci-fi and everything, the specifics of the externals of the situation might never come to us, but the reason why we're reading them is the internal realities of the characters and emotions still ring true to us, like we might be and have those emotions and have those interpersonal relationships and everything. And then our imagination also likes imagining what if things that couldn't happen would happen as well. So yeah. So yeah, I think you're onto something there.
I think that's really well said. Gabby, Mary, any closing thoughts following up from that? I think that's such a great point.
Well, no, I'm just excited to go write a eucatastrophe now. I'm just excited to go apply all of this.
Yeah. Well, friends, if this was a fun series of conversations for you, and if you want to come hang out with a bunch of people who are like, gosh, what did you just say, Caitlin?
What did I say?
Practicing, we're field testing life through our imagination.
Yeah.
So if you want to meet a bunch of we are fiction specialists, field testing the heck out of our imaginations together. It's exactly what we're messing around with inside the community of legend fiction. Now there are probably a lot of other fun, cool communities out there, and you should probably join them all. But maybe if you like the kind of stuff that we talk about, maybe you'll come and enjoy hanging out with us. We have loads of opportunities where we're trying to create these ways for authors to get together and to write together. Because writing is so much more fun when you do it with a group. So it's like Avengers, assemble, you find your fellowship. Maybe that should be the tagline on our website. Find your fellowship, or fellowship assemble.
Fellowship assemble.
Fellowship assemble.
I like that.
For the glory of the elves. All right. Come and check us out, legendfiction.com. And may the Lord be with you. Keep writing.
This is the way.
There you go.